All right, everyone. Welcome back to week 4 of our spooky embroidery stitch along. This week we are going to be doing 2 different stitches. And depending on how you feel about French knots, this should be a pretty easy week. So we're going to be doing our bunny this week in a split stitch. And then our little dots that are around our hoop, around our pattern, we're going to be doing those in a French knot. So I have my practice hoop here to show you some of the stitches and to show you the difference for the number of strands that you can use. So first I'm going to introduce the split stitch right here. I'm going to be using 4 strands. When I actually stitch it, I'm going to use 2. And the reason I'm going to use 2 for my hoop is because there are some of these smaller sections on the rabbit, like the ears. And for those, I just feel like the less number of strands, it's going to be easier to fill in that space. Whereas if it's too chunky, I'm worried about it kind of becoming blobbish, if that makes sense. So I'm using 2 strands, but I thought it might be easier for you to see and learn the stitch with 4. So I have my needle pre-threaded here and knotted with 4 strands in the 310, the black again. And that's the same color that I'm going to use for the rabbit in the pattern as well. So I'm going to use the black, but of course you can use any color that you like or want in your own pattern. So I'm going to start by just bringing my needle up through the fabric here at the end of my line. And then just like with backstitch and with brick stitch, we want to keep our stitches uniform again. Split stitch is honestly super similar to backstitch. So if you like backstitch, you'll probably like split stitch. There are 2 different ways that you can do split stitch. So I'll show you both. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of eyeball how long I want my stitches to be and go down through the fabric with my needle. And then I'm going to come back up on my line, eyeballing the same length of my stitch. That. Oops, kind of became knotted there. There we go. Okay. Then instead of going back down like in backstitch where you go back down that same hole, I'm actually going to go back down in the middle of my first stitch, and I'm going to kind of split that like that. Let's see if I can zoom so you guys can kind of see it. So I've split that stitch in the middle, and then I'm just going to bring my needle all the way through and pull tight. And again, going to do the same thing, doing my best to keep a uniform stitch. Come up, eyeball kind of the middle, so I'm splitting the floss or the thread there, and then bringing it back down. That. So like again, it's very similar to backstitch. You're just splitting the stitch behind you. So that is the first way to do split stitch. The second way is that instead of coming up in front of your last point, so how I was coming up at the front here, what you could do is you can actually come up in the middle of your last stitch. So I can come up over here at this point and go up through the fabric that way. So I'll see if I can show you that way here. There we go. That. So I've come up through the back and kind of split it already. And then moving forward, going down. Both ways are fine. There's really nothing that distinguishes them. You'll still end up with the same texture, the same look. It's kind of down to preference, depending on how you prefer it to look, or how you just prefer the feel of it, I guess. But when it comes to the way that it visually looks, it's going to look the same whether you went forward and then back, or came up through the middle and then stitched forward. That makes sense. I personally find that that sometimes it's faster if you were to go forward and then stitch back into your stitch. I find sometimes it's easier to split it that way than coming up through the middle. But again, it's all, whoops, knotted in the back. It's all preference, so oops, getting some knots back here. There we go. And you don't have to, I don't think you have to split the stitch perfectly every time. I do if I'm working with like an even number 4. I try my best to keep 2 strands on either side, but I don't think it has to be perfect every time. Okay, and then for your last stitch, just like with stem stitch, if you remember, that last stitch can be kind of a personal preference thing too, whether or not you just kind of leave it like that. So you have like split, 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 and then it's just a single stitch here to finish it. Or you can come up through the middle and do like a teeny kind of back stitch over it coming down through that same hole to kind of finish it, so that even that stitch at the end is split, if that makes sense. So I know with the black, again, it's kind of hard to see. If you use a lighter color of thread, then you're going to see the stitch itself a little better. But that is how you do the split stitch. And again, this was with 4 strands. But for my pattern, I'm going to use 2 strands just to help out with some of the detail work. Okay, so that was the split stitch. Let's see here. So let's talk a little bit about how to do that on the rabbit. So that way, if you only need help with the 1 stitch, you can just stop the video after that. So here is, let's see if I can focus a little better on it. There you go. Here is the rabbit. So with split stitch, the way that I like to use it when using it to fill in a piece is I follow the outline of it in the split stitch, kind of like you outline with back stitch. So I would follow all along the outline of the rabbit. And then parallel to that outline, I would do another line of split stitch following the outline again, and keep going, following the outline until I get to the middle and it's filled in completely. So that's one way to use the split stitch. I'm sure if you wanted to do like lines of split stitch, you could do that too. It's just going to change the textured look of it. So I'm going to use the outline and just do like kind of layers upon layers of that outline until I get to the very middle. My plan is to leave the inside of its ears unfilled. So I'll just have the black outline of the bunny, and then this will be unfilled. So I have my 2 strands here of the DMC 310. And I'm going to zoom back out so we can get the whole bunny, so that way you guys can see what I mean. Okay. You can start wherever you want on your outline. I've outlined mine again in my white, let's see, I have it out, I do not, in my white heat erasable pen. So I outlined it in this again, just so I can really see it against the dark fabric. Okay, so I'm going to come up here first to start my stitch. I'm just going to follow the outline all around. I'm going to start stitching forward and then coming back like that. And then remember, when you're doing curves or small shapes, the smaller you keep your stitches, the easier it is to follow along those curved lines. Catch that. And again, remember with the stitch along, you can use any stitch that you want. You don't have to use this stitch. You could definitely fill in the bunny using a satin stitch, would also work. In fact, when I first, oh, it knotted. When I first attempted, sorry, now you get to see my messy back. When I first attempted the pattern, I actually filled in the bunny with a satin stitch and it looked fine. I decided I like split stitch and I like adding different textures, and because we already used satin with the mushrooms, I thought it'd be kind of nice to do a different stitch. I might just cut this. I'm just gonna cut it out instead of trying to unknot it. Unfortunate. But so you can do satin, if you are familiar with long and short stitch, you can do long and short stitch as well. There are definitely lots of different options when it comes to filling in the rabbit. The reason that I didn't choose long short to fill it in was because I'm working in a dark color, so I just didn't feel like I would get any of the benefit of the long short stitch. As far as like color variation goes, because I mean, when I use it, I see it more in like thread painting and things like that, and because I'm not trying to do like a realistically colored bunny, I just didn't think that I would do a long short. But you totally can, even if you're only using one color. In fact, if you're using like a lighter color for your rabbit, whether it's another purple or green or brown or whatever you have, the long short could give it a nice fur-like texture. So that's definitely something to consider, even if you're only using one color to color them in. If that makes sense. As we're working on this, you may notice that your fabric becomes looser in your hoop just over time, week to week. So don't forget to kind of retighten and tug on your fabric, and kind of re-screw on your hoop bolt as well, or the key, I think is what it's called. You may need to adjust that as we stitch, so make sure that you're being aware of that. Okay. That was kind of a weird stitch. Don't know if I like that. We'll see if I can fix it. Maybe I can connect it. Yeah, I can connect it. Okay. So that's kind of my demonstration how I would outline it. Then after I had this whole thing outlined in my first layer of split stitch, I would end here naturally. So I would have connected all this. So I'd come up at the same point over here. I'm just going to create another line of split stitch directly next to it, parallel to it. And then same thing, uniform stitches, splitting the stitch behind me. I would just work on layering it like this. Like that. So then I would just have a second line right next to it. And again, because I'm using the black, it is a little hard to see the two lines, but and then after I did this second line going all the way around, I'd come up and I would have ended at this point again. I would come up next to this one and do another line of split stitch that goes all the way around the rabbit. So that's split stitch, and that's what I'm going to use to do the rabbit. Let me go ahead and zoom back out. Oops. Kind of messed up with the brightness now. There we go. Okay. Zoom. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to bring my practice hoop back over, and I'm going to talk about French knots, which either may cause frustration in some people and other people may totally like it. I'm one of the people that love French knots. I think they're really relaxing to do. They kind of put me to sleep sometimes, but they're fun. We don't have that many on the hoop, so I think it'll be a good balance of like an intro to French knots without being overwhelmed by French knots. So what I did here is I create a little table, and I'm going to go ahead and just finish it like a little French knot chart. So in each one of these boxes, I'm going to show you different strands and a different number of twists. That way you can see how big and how small some French knots can be. So I'm going to start with the 6 strands because I think you'll be able to see it the best. So I've already have my pre-knotted floss here, and I'm using a lighter color because I want you to really be able to see what I'm doing, and I don't want it to get lost in the black. And I'm going to start, oh, I did this wrong. How did I do this wrong? No, I did this right. Okay, yes. Okay, so I'm going to start with 6 strands, and I'm going to twist my floss 1 time around the needle. And then I'll do 6 strands twisting twice around the needle, and then 6 strands twisting 3 times around the needle. So that way you guys can kind of see the difference. So I'm actually going to start with twisting it 3 times. So that way you guys can see it, and we'll work our way down. So again, this is 6 strands. I'm going to just come up through my fabric with my needle. It's kind of dark. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that's a good balance of light and dark. Okay, so coming up, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take hold of my floss with one hand, and I'm going to put my needle kind of into it like this, and I'm going to wrap it 1, 2, 3. Then just to the side of where I came up, just to the side, I'm going to put my needle kind of down so you can kind of see it's kind of balanced in the fabric. And I'm just going to kind of shimmy or push that knot towards the base. Then I'm going to keep holding on to this slack of the floss or the thread, just like we did when we did our chain stitch or a stem stitch, how we didn't let it go all the way through. Kind of the same. We're just going to monitor the speed really. And then I'm just going to push my needle down. I'm just going to let the floss slowly go back through and then pull tight. Like that. And that's a French knot. Let's go ahead and try it with 2. So again, I'm going to come up. Now with French knots, your floss is going to get twisty, so let it dangle with your needle so that way you don't get knots. I'm going to go 1, 2, and then I'm just going to go down right to the side of where I came up. I'm not going to go down the same hole. I'm going to put my needle kind of through it so I can shimmy that knot down. And then I'm going to push my needle through and then slowly tug. You don't want to go too fast because if you get, I've gotten it before, gotten that to like knot up, and then it's just frustrating. So slowly kind of moderating the speed as you tug it through. So that's another French knot. Most people, I feel like where they mess up is that they use the same hole to go down, and then their knot disappears. So if your knot is disappearing, it's either slipping off your needle or it's going down to the same hole. Let's try with 1. So up, pull all the way through, take your needle, wrap it over 1, and then don't go down to the same hole, just go just to the side of it. Push your twist down, push your needle through, and then slowly, using your finger to keep the floss from twisting too much, pull tight. So that's a French knot. I was trying to think, there was something else as I was doing that. I was like, oh, I should mention this. And now I don't remember. But anyways, that's a French knot. Again, this is 6 strands with 1 twist, 2 twists, and 3 twists. And you can already see the different sizes. Oh, I know. A lot of time people will ask, what kind of knot is this that's being used in the piece? And usually it seems like it's a French knot. But French knots can look super different depending on how many strands someone's using and how loose they've wrapped it and kept it wrapped. So you can do really loose French knots. Let's see if I have any examples. Not really. You can do really loose French knots that look kind of messy and kind of give like more texture to a piece. I think that sometimes confuses people when they see it. They don't really recognize the French knot, but it's still all French knots. Okay, so let's go to 4 strands. And I'm going to zoom in on this one to see if that helps a little bit. There we go. All right, so again, we have 4 strands. I'm going to start down here with 3 twists around my needle in this box. So that way you guys can kind of see the difference. So going up, pulling it tight through. I'm going to grab my floss. And then I always do my French knot kind of towards the base of it. You don't want to go too close and wrap it. Give yourself a little bit of space. 2, 3. push it down, not in the same hole, like that. And then this hoop is small enough so I can hold the hoop and the floss at the same time. You're just gonna pull down and slowly let go, like that. Okay, let's try 2 twists. And then 1, 2 over my needle, not through the same hole, just to the side of it. Shimmy that floss down to the base. And then I don't hold the floss like too tightly. Just kind of let it, and that's kind of like a little bit of a looser French knot, I feel like. You can kind of tell. 4 strands, 1 twist. 1, oh, let me do it a little slower. 1. And then just to the side of where I came up, shimmying that thread down, and then gently tugging through so that it doesn't twist. And remember, again, your needle is going to twist, so you're going to need to let it just dangle off of your hoop and let the needle kind of just untwist itself. All right, so that is 4 strands. We're going to do 2 strands next. That way you can see them. Oops, a little tinier. Okay. And you can already kind of tell the difference between sizes here. So you have 6 and 4. You can kind of tell the different sizes of French knots there. So let's start with, 2 strands, 3 twists. So coming up, pulling it tight, taking my hand and holding it. 1, 2, 3. Just to the side of that hole, shimmying the floss down, pushing my needle, and then just keeping my finger there to keep the floss from twisting or going through too fast. 1, 2. And then 1. 1. Oops, got caught on something. There we go. 1. Little baby. So you can already see, I think, a big difference on the sizes there. So this is just 1 twist all the way, 2 twists, and then 3 twists. So it's a pretty big difference as far as that goes. So that is a French knot, and we're going to be using that for our little dots on the pieces. If you have a hard time with French knots, I've heard that, what's it called? Is it colonial knots can be another good option to use. I don't really use a lot of colonial knots, so maybe we'll do a different tutorial for that one, but French knots are what we're going to use. So there's a little chart. You can kind of look at that and decide what number of strands work best for you. In our piece, you can kind of you can do like 6 and then 2 and then 3. You can feel free to kind of mix it up however you would like, or you can keep it the same. I think I'm probably going to use 3 strands maybe for mine, or maybe 2. I haven't quite made up my mind. I might kind of jump around a little bit. So yeah, so that is French knots and the split stitch. I hope you have fun with it. Good luck with the French knots. I swear, once you have them down, they're super, super fun and super easy to do. But I do know that they do take lots of practice, but that's every stitch. So don't get overwhelmed, just keep on going. If you really like the French knots, you can add more of the little dots all around. If you don't like them, don't do them. You can just stop. That's totally fine. And then next week we'll do the letters. All right, happy stitching.